Today on Public Research, as America prepares to host the World Cup, I'm joined by ESPN's Gab Marcotti.
Maybe you weren't paying attention before, but they want VAR straight away. Maybe Javier Tebas forgot. They made their views
What are the leading soccer journalists in the world today?
Conte effectively sacked himself, and Mourinho got the whole club to the brink of the relegation.
We discuss his international upbringing, spanning Italy, the US, Asia, and the UK.
I was born in Milan. I lived in Chicago. I lived in Warsaw. I lived in Frankfurt. I lived just outside New York. I lived in Tokyo. Graduated high school in London. Went to college in Philly. Went to grad school in New York, and then ended up back here.
His decades watching top-level soccer up close.
It's pretty much unscripted opera, right? It is 11v11, and you really have no idea what's going to happen.
The brilliance of Lionel Messi, Ronaldo, and Kevin De Bruyne, the greatest games he's ever seen, what makes the global game so magical, and why he still loves it after all these years. Can I start out with, you have citizenship, you have Italian citizenship, American, do you also have British citizenship?
No, I only have Italian citizenship.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, my kids have all three, but I only have Italian citizenship.
I'm just fascinated with your background. So you spent some time in Chicago growing up and all over the place. What were your parents like academics or?
No, my dad was a banker, and so every few years from the age of 3, I was born in Milan. I lived there until I was 3 years old. Every few years, we would just kind of move somewhere else because of his job. So, yeah, I lived in Chicago. I lived in Warsaw. I lived in Frankfurt. I lived in just outside New York in Westchester County. I lived in Tokyo. Graduated high school in London. Went to college in Philly, went to grad school in New York, and then ended up back here.
Well, I'm just curious because I'm from Chicago. Where in Chicago do you live?
Okay, bear in mind I was like,
yeah.
4, but I was at a town called Kenilworth.
You have no accent. I'm amazed by that. No accent. Yeah.
I learned to speak English in the US when I was 3. And then after that, I always went to international schools or American schools where a lot of the faculty, came from the States. So I think that probably had a lot to do with it.
So you speak English, Italian, Spanish, what?
I can get by in Spanish. I can get by in German and Japanese and French.
Japanese and French. Wow. That's amazing. Yeah, I'm sort of curious because I think your very cosmopolitan background gives you a very unique perspective on things. With the World Cup, I've been sort of shocked. Like I heard Alistair Campbell on his podcast with Roy Stewart say, I'm not going to the U.S. I won't go to the U.S. for the World Cup, just as like a protest. As an American, it's shocking to be seen as a country that way.
I don't know. I know Alistair, actually. I don't know his reasons, but I suspect it might have been around the time of some of the Greenland business. And certainly, the reaction from a lot of people in Europe was like, what the hell? We're NATO allies. And I think there was a feeling that, you had to draw the line somewhere. And yeah, it was very fraught. And apparently now they have a bigger and better deal, I think he said. So I guess it's a win-win. But around that time, there were petitions. There were there were politicians in Germany and Holland and elsewhere, pretty much flatly calling for a boycott of the World Cup, which is also kind of unfair, but part of the narrative in the sense that it's not just the U.S. associated with the World Cup; it's Mexico and Canada, obviously,
Mm,
as well. And
yeah.
I don't think it's they're annoyed with Mark Carney, but yeah, I think in that context, there was a very visceral reaction.
What about soccer? One thing I love about I'm sorry. I'm going to have to make a choice about whether I should say football or soccer. I'm going to try to say football, even though it's unnatural as an American. What about?
Sorry, sorry. This is a pet peeve of mine. I'm sorry. I'm super pedantic about
Yes,
this.
yes. Yeah.
My least favorite people in the world are people, well, not my least favorite, but certainly in this sphere anyway. It's those people who, you know, and I run into many of them here in England actually, who say, "Oh, it's football, not soccer. You can't say that. That's just a stupid Americanism." That's not true.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah. So this is something you can use to impress your friends.
Yeah.
So the sport started around the same. I think the laws of the game were initially codified in 1860, the so-called Cambridge rules, but 1863, I think it was. Around the same time, rugby also started up, and both sports called themselves football. Um, One was known as rugby football, and that's why to this day the governing body of rugby, it's called the Rugby Football Union. It's not called the Rugby Union. And the other one was known as association football. So the word soccer comes from association, from the SOCC and that. And it's so widespread, or it was so widespread until maybe, I don't know, the 70s or 80s, that somebody did a study in the Times of London, which is, one of the most, it's a kind of like the establishment paper par excellence here
Mm-hmm.
in England. They found that there were just as many references to soccer
Oh,
as there were
wow.
to football. Um, in this country, Sky Sports, which has the right to the Premier League and is, kind of like a US, British equivalent in some ways, they have a show called Sky Soccer Saturday, which is
Oh.
still on. And it's not like they make it for Americans.
Well, now
It's
I
just
feel
not,
better.
yeah, it's not a big deal to anybody who's a fan over here. It is a deal. It is a big deal to a certain brand of kind of pretentious know-it-all who's probably not a fan and, likes to
Well,
be pedantic
th-
about the stuff.
that's very kind of you. I feel better now. One of the beauties of soccer to me is actually a commercial aspect. The fact there are no commercial breaks.
For
But I,
now.
yeah, for now. But I was reflecting on this recently about like what I love about soccer and the sort of purity of the game. And you can be a little guy like Messi and be the greatest player. You can be the greatest player in so many different ways. What do you still love about the sport? What keeps you invested?
It's funny. I was having this conversation with a dear friend just the other day. I'm gonna give you more than one answer. So one is kind of in terms of the sport itself, there's moments of skill and athleticism that are still breathtaking. And yes, you can absolutely find those in other sports too, but this is the one that I'm obviously most engaged in because I do this for a living, and they can pop up at any time. And sometimes you don't just see them from the great players, right? You see them from um I want to say average players because they're still, high ranking top level professionals, but players who aren't superstars and they still pull this stuff off. That's one aspect of it. Another aspect of it is the fact that, it's pretty much unscripted opera, right? Once you cross that, and again, this applies to other sports as well, but it is 11v11 and you really have no idea what's going to happen. And sometimes, you compare it to entertainment, a film or a concert. There's a certain script. There's one person in control, whether it's a director, whether it's the artist. Here, there really isn't, because you've got these sort of two kind of rival forces battling it out. And the third, I think, is just the kind of just universality of it. and the tribalism of it. And I don't like some aspects of the tribalism, but this idea of, and it is a bit of a cliche, but this idea of identity, this idea of relating to something that's outside you, uh, this idea that it's kind of like a universal lingua franca as well. Um, there's a I'll give you two stories in that kind of blew me away. There was an Italian pilot who was part of it was NATO or the coalition of the whaling or whatever the hell during the first Gulf War, and who was shot down over Iraq and taken prisoner. Um, and he was shot down, and then he sort of wandered around, and then he was captured. Um, and people were, and he said where he was from and stuff like that, and people were convinced that he was lying, that he was not actually Italian. He had no documents on him because he ditched everything. And they assumed that he was a spy, either an American spy or whatever. I mean, they knew he was an enemy combatant, but I think he felt it made a difference. And he started, they asked him about the 1990 World Cup, figuring if this guy's American, he's not going to have any idea. And the guy's face lit up, and it turns out the other guys are fans too. And they obviously didn't become friends because he stayed I think he stayed in captivity for 6 months or 3 months or whatever it was. But it turned the narrative on its head. And there's a certain universalism. There's an old film. I think you can find clips of it on YouTube if you're into this. It's called Cup Final. And it's like from the late 80s, I think. It's an Israeli film. And it talks about this Israeli soldier who gets kidnapped by the PLO, and they're in captivity, and there's a lot of tension and so on. And then the story is set before the 1982 World Cup, which was held in Spain. Um, and sort of the PLO guys, they go through his stuff and they find that in his wallet he has tickets to a World Cup game. I think it's Italy, Brazil, or something like that. And they're like, "What the hell? Like, why do you have this?" And he said, "Look, Israel's never going to make a World Cup in my lifetime again. I'm I'm a football fan. I'm a fan of Italy." It turns out one of the Palestinians, he'd been exiled and he had lived in Rome, and he was also a big Italy fan. I mean, the movie's poignant. I don't want to give away the ending. Some people may not like it. It's not like they all become friends and it's kumbaya, but they find this moment, right, through sport, through the World Cup, which isn't even their own. It's not their country. It's somebody else's country, and I don't know. I think there's something magical in that. Could you get that if they were both Swifties? Maybe you could. I don't know, but ultimately, I find it comforting that there's these sort of cultural linchpins, right, that often unite unite us as humanity.
I'll be honest. Because of some world events, I sort of I haven't watched a lot of football since 2 years ago. Okay, but I watched a lot of it, and I just have to ask this because it's the bias is always to say, oh, the teams I watched are the best here, whatever. There's a specific Manchester City team before they got Holland. It was back when they had Raheem Sterling, like the year before they got Holland. They would have Foden on the bench. And that team, I mean, my expertise of soccer is like this compared to you. But that team was so unbelievable. And I was just curious, was that team unbelievable or is it just my ignorance?
Um, hey, I mean, City've had some tremendous teams, and you just look at the numbers, and they've won the Premier League, which is probably the toughest, most competitive league to win, with massive points totals. So it could be any one of several teams. I think I'm not a City fan, but I think City fans would probably struggle to say, yeah, this was our best team. I mean, remember with Holland in his first season, they won the treble, which is a really big deal. Um, So I think it's hard to know exactly which team you mean, but yeah, I mean, City've won the title, I want to say 8 of the last 10 years or 7 of the last 10 years, something like that. So they're certainly a pretty stacked team.
Yeah, it was the year before they got Holland, and it just seemed like they had like just they would have two unbelievable players on the bench every game. It was just like crazy.
They still do.
Yeah, yeah, but they've fallen. I thought they never fall from grace, but apparently they. De Bruyne, he's a magical player to me, and I just loved watching him play. How does he rank as far as the players you've seen?
I He's right up there. And it's funny because I think inevitably you're somehow influenced by how players look, and he seems kind of mild mannered and low key with that red hair, and then you see him just strike the ball so well, pass the ball so well. Right now he's at Napoli and he's injured. He's been injured for a big chunk of the season, and he had pretty long injury layoffs in the last kind of 3, 4 years at Manchester City. Um, there, yeah, he just sees things, right? Again, in any sport, there's a skill component being able to execute the pass, but there's also that ability to see the pass before anybody else. And that has like a multiplier effect, I think, on your ability because you have that split second or that second to actually make the pass. And the brain connects with the leg and the body and the muscles and makes it happen. And I think with De Bruyne especially, it's not just that he's a great technical player, but he had that vision or still has that vision. That's probably the last thing to go. In fact, I know it's the last thing to go because having had the privilege of spending time with great players, and again, I think this is common to every sport, they always talk about how their mind wants to do things that the body can no longer do.
I was watching like a best of a compilation of Kevin De Bruyne, and it was like watching a quarterback. He would get the ball, and he was like a quarterback. He could pinpoint it
Yeah.
right away. And I was thinking about comparing like a best of for Messi, who's like dribble, 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 amazing, and like there's something beautiful about how you can be the best in the sport in totally different styles. Not to say Messi is an amazing passer, but is that part of the beauty of the game? Do you think?
Um, yeah, I think it's probably changing a little bit in the sense that, um, such as the preparation of these players, that many guys are good at many different things. Um, and some people have said, how they often say, like, oh, should you work on your strengths or should you work on your weaknesses or whatever else? What benefits you in terms of net outcome. Um, but I mean, look, De Bruyne is obviously a notch above. Um, but the idea that people who do such different things um, can so easily coexist on a pitch. Uh, yeah, I guess if you take a step back, it is something that maybe does set the game apart. But I don't. I mean, I think to some degree that's going to be common to most team sports, right? Um, an offensive lineman's skill set is going to be different from that of a wide receiver. Um, so actually, maybe I'd push back on that a little bit and suggest that maybe this sport is actually a little more universal in the sense that at any given time, you're asked to do certain things. We look at Messi now, old, who's obviously older and slowed down, and you don't want him running around, but young Messi used to run around off the ball in the early Barcelona Pep teams. That was very much a pressing team, and he'd be this kind of like dervish running around trying to win the ball back, and he did it very, very well. It's not something you ever see him do now for obvious reasons. So I think, yeah, maybe now that you made me think about it, I might argue I'd push back on that and say actually that in general, as a sport, it is something that forces you to be a little bit more universal in your skills and less specialized. than say basketball or American football.
I'll push back on that. I'll say, like, but if you look at quarterback, the greatest quarterbacks, Joe Montana, Tom Brady, they aren't radically, they're all great passers. They're not as different to me as like a De Bruyne and a Messi in style.
I mean, Eagles fan, I love Jalen Hurts, your Super Bowl MVP. He is the polar opposite of Tom Brady. Lamar Jackson is very different from Tom Brady or Peyton Manning, right?
You got me on that one. I think you're right on that.
I'm not an expert, just a fan here.
Yeah. You know? No, you're right on that. It's funny. I look back on the Messi Ronaldo era, like the Peyton Manning Brady era, and maybe it's, you know, an age nostalgia thing, but I sort of feel like it's never going to get better than that. I mean, like, how do you look back on that? I mean, there was just something so beautiful and interesting about the two top players being both in Spain and literally like the polar opposite, right? Ronaldo's the gelled hair and Messi's like the understated, soft-spoken guy. Well, how do you look back on that era?
I think you make a great point. I'm always loath to say, oh, there's never going to be, you know, they're never going to be beaten. Somebody else could come along, and it's possible Lamine Yamal or Kylian Mbappe, by the time they're done, or maybe even Erling Haaland, will be seen as greater than Messi and Cristiano. I mean, we'll never know. Or we will know eventually, but not for a while. But I find it really improbable that the context in which the rivalry played out, especially kind of in the earlier years, I don't think that's ever going to be matched for backstory or whatever, because, you know, you have two players who most people will have in their top five all time. And many would have Messi at number one. Some might have Cristiano at number one, which is rare enough. And then, like you said, you put them at Barcelona and Real Madrid with Pep Guardiola and Jose Mourinho as the coaches, especially in the early, you know, in the early part when the rivalry really took off. In that context, against the backdrop of Spain winning a World Cup and winning the Euros and being the best team in the world, so with that supporting cast, it's really hard for you to, you know, in a league which is probably not a good thing, but which is just dominated by those two teams. You know, it's hard to imagine in the Premier League, because it's hard to imagine a Premier League setting where you would have, you know, just two teams so far ahead of everybody year after year after year. As we've seen, it's actually really difficult to do. So I think that background and that context probably, I just think it's highly improbable that those conditions would ever exist again. And then on top of that, to have, you know, two legit GOAT candidates as well, with that level of charisma, just as, you know, viral videos and social media, and even something as basic as cell phones were taking off, and globalization and interconnectedness, all this stuff coming together in sort of this maelstrom, if you will, that really defined kind of that, you know, whatever you want to call it, that sort of 2010 onwards era. You're not going to get those conditions again. Highly unlikely.
I have this Ronaldo clip. Do you mind if I showed it to you?
No, go for it.
Okay. I know that the soccer TV, the rights holders are crazy. Like, I notice you guys never play video on your podcast. I don't even think you show pictures. Like, they're so locked down.
Yeah, I mean, people pay a lot of money for rights, so they want to, you know, be careful what they do with it. I hope you don't get in trouble for this.
Yeah.
My bosses are watching. I have nothing to do with this photograph.
Can you see what's on the screen?
I can, yeah.
Okay. I made this, and I watch this just for fun. Now, it's a little bit sped up, but I watch it, and I just marvel at this. This is from Ronaldo's first season. I just want to play this real quick.
Yeah, the step over king.
Oh my god. But he's like a machine. Look at this. Oh. almost like superhuman.
Yeah.
It's a whole thing. I speed it up like to 110.
No, but what's remarkable, I think, is that, and I think this speaks to kind of the athlete as they mature, as they grow older, as their body necessarily changes. Is that, I mean, that clip you showed is, you said it was from his first season in Manchester United, right? So we're going, was it 2007, 08, something like that? The dude's still playing. And for the last 5 years, he looks nothing like, he doesn't look like that guy, and he doesn't play like that guy. And, he plays effectively a different position. He's center forward. He's still devastating, but he does other things that maybe he didn't do before. Cristiano Ronaldo, I'm sure you've seen the clips of his leaps, that he's one of the best headers in the world. The goal against Atletico Madrid where, he was on a basketball court, he would have put his head through the basket just about. I mean, that kind of stuff is unreal. And imagine an athlete who, I mean, I presume he had the athleticism back then, but I don't think he had that leaping ability because he then worked on his body and he said, all right, this skill I'm not necessarily going to do anymore. Also because, the step overs, you can rarely pull that off, right? Maybe I don't have the acceleration there, but I can do this. I can be so physically strong that I can now bully my way in ways that I couldn't before. And I can use my strength intelligently. So that, and look, people always compare the other. Messi has done that too in other ways. Other ways he's evolved, the way he uses space. The fact that if you see him play in person, he's literally walking for like most of the game. And then he suddenly accelerates and chooses the right moments to do so. I mean, we don't think of athletes as being intelligent in that way, but man, that ability to reinvent yourself, that ability to, one part of your skill set starts to wane a little bit, and so you strengthen another part, knowing how to do that, and then knowing how to exploit that. That's not just God's gift. That's not just will. That's willpower. That's also intelligent. You got to know how, right?
Yeah, I mean, I see soccer and hockey as very similar, and I see, because of the nature of the sports, I see a player like Patrick Kane or Messi. There's almost an artistic nature to what they do. They have such an intuitive sense of how to use space and stuff. And there's this one clip from this compilation I think sums up the question. Here, now he's going to be taken down in a second. Here. Now look at what he does. Do you see that where he goes down and he stays up, and there's something about that like epitomizes. He has such a, I mean this in a good way, ego as a player. Like the way he carries himself on the field, you know what I mean? Is Ronaldo unique in the amount of personality there is in his game? Like there is this ego of I am Ronaldo sort of in the way he carries himself, or are there other players?
Oh, I think there's others. I mean, when you have the ego in their public pronouncements and the sort of the strutting, the wanting to carry the team, some of it is they're playing a character who's part of who they are, but maybe they accentuate it. But no, I think there's others. I mean, Zlatan Ibrahimovic, being the most obvious, the first obvious one that comes to mind. No, you've had people like that, people who, and you wonder if people are like, heck, they're going to call me a diva anyway. Why don't I just go and embrace it, right? And there's others who might say that, Messi's been a diva in different ways, right? Maybe less obvious one. And obviously his body language doesn't suggest that, especially when he was younger. But there's definitely an element of personality that's part of the package.
If you could order up, like, I wish I could see this team again. For instance, I sort of missed that classic Messi era when it was him and all the other little guys from Spain, the Xavi. Oh my God, I'm gonna blank on names.
Iniesta,
David
Villa, yeah.
And they're all like 5 foot whatever, and they're just unbelievable. even though they look like a guy who could work at a bank. What are the other teams where it's like, oh man, if I could just see them play one more game?
I mean, there's teams from history, from like before I was
Yeah,
born, that
yeah.
you just hear about, and obviously the Hungary team of the early '50s, so-called Mighty Magyars, um, that just destroyed everybody, and were just on another level skill-wise. And you can see, I mean, they have some clips on them on YouTube, and you can just see they look like they're from the present, like, or if not the future, even though they're all grainy, black and white. Um, and obviously, the sort of those great Holland and Ajax sides of the early '70s, the so-called total football, that's a bit of a misnomer. I never got a chance to see that. From teams that I've covered professionally, I think probably the World Cup winning Spain side, World Cup and 2 Euros, which that really stood out. That really stood out because fundamentally, that team was a coming together of, we mentioned it before, Barcelona and Real Madrid, um, Mourinho's Real Madrid, and Pep's Barcelona. I mean, you couldn't ratchet the rivalry up any higher, right? There's a wonderful story, which turns out it's true because they both talked about it. Spain had never really done much in international football before that generation. And there's reasons for it, and there's political reasons for it as well. Catalonia, Real Madrid, Franco, all the stuff that, I think casual fans might know about, the fact that some people in Spain feel more loyal to their region and to the national team and whatever. But it's just a wonderful scene or wonderful story where Xavi of Barcelona and Iker Casillas of Real Madrid, who'd known each other since, playing at under 17 level for Spain, that they talk to each other and they say, you know, we put our clubs first, and that's right. Because there's an identity here. Xavi joined Barcelona when he was 8 years old. He's Catalan through and through. Same thing with Casillas and Real Madrid. But aren't we kind of committing a sin if we let that? We got so much talent in this country. If we let that get in the way of winning a World Cup or winning a Euros. And they decided that, they, as the leaders of the Spanish players on the two teams, that they would actually bring them together, and kind of create this, when they were in the national team bubble, the differences, the Catalans, the Castilians, all of this would go away. Anything that happened when they were Barcelona and Real Madrid, it was just a no-go area. And the only focus was to come together as a team. Um, and that's pretty amazing. I mean, that is part of the narrative, right, of international football. All the club, you leave that behind for that period, and you work together. So yeah, so I think that team for me will always have a special place in my heart.
Where were you when Germany beat Brazil? Was it 7-1?
7-1.
Yeah,
I was there.
I watched it on TV, and I'll never forget it.
Yeah.
What was that like? I mean, it was just unbelievable.
You know, is it Elizabeth Kubler-Ross from Five Stages of Death? Right.
Of grief.
Of grief.
Yeah.
I wrote a column based around that, based around the faces of the people in the crowd that I saw there in Belo Horizonte. I'm blanking on this now, but I think it was like 4-0 after 25 minutes. And I just, these looks of disbelief, of anger, of false hope, of depression. I mean, yeah, that was unreal. The fact that, you're Brazilian and you grew up with the trauma of 1950 when Brazil threw away the de facto final, at the Maracanã against Uruguay. They were winning 1-0. They ended up losing 2-1. Suicides, hospitalizations, blah blah blah. And then you figure it just isn't going to happen. The World Cup's coming back to Brazil. We're the gold standard. After 68 years, we're going to kind of heal this original sin. And no, they go and they get their backsides handed to them in that way.
Wait, there were suicides?
Not, I mean, not to my knowledge after
No, no.
2018,
Oh
but the
no, but the older.
1950.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, that's part of the narrative. So
Wow.
the bizarre thing in that World Cup, it was the only World Cup where they had an actual group stage at the end rather than the finals. They're the four best teams, and I forget who the other two were but Brazil absolutely wiped the floor with them. So they had a massive goal difference. Uruguay kind of limped through. Uruguay took the lead. As again, this is all narrative and lore, right? But it's based on contemporaneous reporting at the time. That the largest crowd ever assembled to watch a game, 200,000 people at the Maracanã in Rio de Janeiro, and the stadium holds half that. I mean, or held half that back then. Um, and there, as the story goes, they had 11 Cadillacs with the name of the 11 starting players out there, ready to go to be handed to them afterwards. And they take the lead, and they basically start screwing around rather than scoring a second goal or deciding to be defensive and hit on the counterattack because a draw would have sufficed for them to be world champions. And they paid a price. And as the story goes, there's people who had heart attacks, people who committed suicide after that, people who were just in total disbelief.
So when you were at the Brazil game, would you literally look to your left and right and see people cry?
Oh yeah,
Oh wow.
I saw every sort of expression known to man.
God.
Because when you're at a press box, especially in that press
Yeah.
box in Belo Horizonte, you're all it is an area of a stand where you have a desk and you share a little TV so you can watch replays, but all around you are fans. All around you is open. Um, so you're very aware of the reaction of the supporters because they're in front of you, behind you, to the side. In some places in the press box, you're kind of fenced in and everything, but that's not the case. That wasn't the case there in 2018.
Um, Manchester United. It's kind of sad, because I think for younger people, they're never even gonna know the Manchester United the prestige that there was. But I was thinking about the Glazers versus like Qatar and like the UAE and these huge sovereign funds. In a way, do you think the Glazers, they obviously, I think they made a mistake putting this Woodcock guy, letting this banker guy run the team for whatever.
Woodward, Ed
Yeah,
Woodward.
Woodward, sorry. But could they really compete with these sovereign wealth funds from the Gulf?
Um,
Actually, they spent more. I'm wrong. They spent more than they. I'm wrong. Yeah.
so look, there's a lot not to like about the Glazers, and the way they took over the club.
Yeah.
I think it's worth remembering that United continued to win for a while after they took over the club. 2012 was Sir Alex Ferguson's goodbye. Uh, and I think the financial stability rules, at UEFA level anyway, came in the year after that. So, in theory, it should have leveled the playing field a little bit in the sense that spending is tied to revenue. Manchester United, not this past year because they weren't in Europe, but I think in most seasons had higher revenues than Manchester City, which meant that they could spend more. And this has nothing to do with dubious sponsorships and 115 charges and whatever. These are like according to the actual accounts that City file, right? Leaving aside the possibility that City might have been doing something that they weren't supposed to do, which is what they're charged with. So, no, I mean, I think the harsh reality is United's supposed downfall is down to bad decisions and incompetence as much as it is down to their stiffer competition because they certainly had the tools to compete. If you want to take a real kind of historical look at this, and some people don't like to hear this, one of the remarkable things about Manchester United that they're so insanely popular and they're such a big club, when in fact throughout their history they've really only had two periods where they were dominant under Sir Alex and then kind of in the Busby era, right? So you take away that era kind of really kind of sort of post Munich, or I mean, you can include pre Munich too, I guess, although that was slightly different. Right up until 1970 and then 73 or 72 it was that they got United were actually relegated. And then they were underachievers while still being very, very popular. They were underachievers until 20 years later when Fergie came. So um, that's kind of what makes them different, I think, from a lot of clubs.
I think it's good for the Europeans to look down their nose on sports on the Americans for lots of reasons. But one thing my American eyes, I will stand by is Mbappe. Okay, they said like this is the great player, but I'd look at him, I'd be like, he's in France. That's like a one-team league. It's like Paris Saint-Germain. They win every year. Like, how can you be the best player and then not challenge yourself?
Okay, well, you looked at it from the American angle,
Yeah.
so will I. I mean, sometimes the top pick in the NFL draft doesn't come from the SEC, right? Or the Big Ten. And they turn out to be pretty darn good. Again, wearing my Eagles hat. Carson Wentz went to North Dakota State, right? And he's pretty good. And I
But
think he
he
was the
had to
second.
come to the NFL, the
He was the
university.
second pick in the draft.
Yeah, yeah.
So people obviously thought he was very good before before he even got in the draft, right? Um, I think but the other key dimension in this is that Mbappe, people saw him being really good in the Champions League and playing for France, where he played against top competition. And I think that's when people really said, wait a minute, this guy's special. This guy's one of the best players in the world. And he was able to do that while playing in France. So you have that additional dimension. You can be in a supposedly weaker league, like Ligue 1, which most people, even my Gab and Jules show co-host Jules would agree is ranks well below the Premier League. And you can look at it and say, oh, well, scoring 20 goals there, no biggie, do it against the Premier League, big tougher competition. Fine. But the
The
point is, if you score 30 goals there, and then you score 10 goals in a Champions League season, and then, you take France to a World Cup final or whatnot, and you play a key role in that, yeah, then you're pretty good. So you always have this kind of additional proving ground outside of the league you're in. Take it back to American sports. How often have we seen? I'll take it to college basketball this time, and I am dating myself, so I'm just gonna talk about the past, right? But we've had situations where some guy at like some no name, or I don't want to say no name, but some guy from a smaller school, right, puts up insane numbers, and you're like, oh, is this guy actually any good? When the toughest team that they play is Buffalo or Loyola or whatever, and then they get to the NCAA, and you don't know how good the team is, and then when they're in the tournament, they actually advance and they get to the Elite Eight or whatever, right? Say, oh yeah, they actually are pretty good. He did it against Michigan, he did it against UNC or Duke or whatever. So I think that's the way you should maybe kind of view it.
Yeah. The only sport I watch is soccer really now is because of something you joked about in the beginning, which is the lack of ad breaks. I just hate ads. I can't stand it. I won't watch ads. I hate it. And I love soccer. It's just and I wonder, you joked about this, but I'm serious. I just think about how much money, like in television, there must be attempts by like some greedy business guys in the history of this to be like, look. We want to respect it, but why don't we just add just little breaks every
Well,
15? Have they tried to have like some American
no,
TV?
it's been there. I mean, so before the 94 World Cup in the US, um, FIFA were under a ton of pressure to divide the game into quarters, precisely so you could have two more ad breaks. Um, you may get something de facto like that, because I don't think it's been 100% confirmed, but I'm told it's very, very likely that FIFA is going to arrange for heat breaks during the games, one per half, which again, you can say, hey, look, it makes sense. I'm in Miami, it's 200% humidity and it's 98 degrees. The thing is, but they've said, oh, but if we have it in Miami, we have to have it, when we're playing inside a dome, or we have to have it in Vancouver as well, when, that we have totally different weather. Um, and if you want to be super cynical, that's a chance for broadcasters to stick some ads in. But even beyond that, we've had, we have other types of ads. We have the ad that like pops up, where like the screen gets small and then the ad pops up on the side. We've had that. We've had ads. They don't do this anymore, but in some countries they've had ads when like the ball goes out of play and it's just like a little 5-second mini ad. I think what you're seeing, I always wonder about that. I'm not an advertising guy at all, but I'm kind of fascinated because I don't see the logic in it, right? I don't remember commercials, except for the ones in the Super Bowl, because that's a thing. I don't buy things because I've seen somebody in a commercial. Like, this is not the way my brain operates, right? And I would have thought most people would be desensitized to them. But what's happened apparently is all these companies that spent a ton of money on making commercials on television advertising, they're stuck because most people don't watch live TV unless it's live sports or breaking news or, you know, back in the day, like, The Voice or whatever, right? So unless the show is live, and that means that I can fast forward through commercials, or watch Netflix and there are no commercials, right? So um, that, and so all this advertising money has to go somewhere. And even though I think ads are a lot less effective than they were, the amount of money still there and kind of the slots where people will actually see them have actually diminished a little bit. And so that's why there's still kind of this incentive in live sports and live events to kind of cram in ads whenever you can.
I'm curious, has racism in European soccer, has it decreased in recent years or what? Because I remember, and maybe I've just not been paying attention, but there were really horrible sort of racist incidents, people making like, bananas stuff. And is that decreased?
I don't want to say racism has decreased because
Yeah.
I like to speak of racist incidents,
Yeah.
because those are the things you can actually see.
Right,
Like
right.
racism as a set of prejudices and beliefs which leads you to discriminate. That's something that, viewed from the outside is difficult to spot. I hope the latter, the unseen kind of racism has diminished, but I genuinely don't know. Um, in terms of racist incidents at games, it definitely has gone down. It's gone down tremendously, for a number of reasons. Partly, I think it's a lot less socially tolerable. Um, we live in pretty diverse societies, and it's not something that people tolerate. And so, a lot of times, you're talking about some individuals in a crowd. It's not like, oh, that guy's a jerk, screw him, but I won't say anything. No, it's that guy's a jerk, screw him, I'll report it. That's had a tremendous impact. The fact that the much derided and much maligned racism protocol, as it's called, whereby at the first incident, there's an announcement over the loudspeaker. At the second incident, there's a suspension in the game. And at the third incident, the game is abandoned. I think that's actually proved to be a very big deterrent, uh, because what's happened is, 80, 90, 95% of paying customers, however many, whatever percentage is, they're there to watch the game. They don't want the game interrupted. They don't want the teams to walk off. And so you kind of create this positive peer pressure. The other thing that's happened is with security cameras, with clubs taking this more seriously, you have a situation where it's not that difficult to go, or it's not as difficult as it was in a crowd of people to identify the person who is using racist abuse, let alone making monkey gestures or whatever. And, these days there's digital ticketing. They tend to know all about you when you go in the stadium. There's cameras everywhere following you to the bathroom. clubs first and foremost, there's an expectation that clubs will say, "Hey, I don't want you associated with my team, so I'm going to ban you from visiting the stadium." And then on top of that, in certain countries, um, you've got like I'm thinking of Spain, I'm thinking of the United Kingdom. There is, hate that there are. I know this is controversial in the U.S. Some people don't think it should exist, but hate speech is an actual crime. So you can actually, go to prison for it or pay a fine or get a suspended sentence. It goes on your actual criminal record. Some people see it as a violation of free speech. We often get lectures from across the pond from certain individuals. But in these countries, certainly just in a sporting sphere, I think it has definitely contributed to, let's say, the overt racism. The covert racism, which you might say is even more pernicious. I can't really judge, whether it's not for me as middle-aged white guy to
Yeah.
come out and tell people, oh yeah, it's getting
Yeah.
better or it's getting worse.
Last two soccer
That's
questions.
above my pay grade.
If there are great games, you would just say to people, okay, you want to see a great soccer game? Go check out this game, this game. What would you say?
Like the greatest
Like
games.
if you're just like trying to like sell soccer, like, okay, you want to see some great soccer? Go look at this game. Go look at that game.
So from the past,
Yeah, from the past.
um, well, there was a famous Manchester United against Real Madrid with the it's like 20 years ago, which some people say was one of the greatest games at Old Trafford. I want to say 2002, something like that. I think the original Ronaldo scored a couple goals in that. If you want to go even further back, FIFA actually had a vote on this, on what the greatest game of all time was, and they said the game of the 20th century anyway was semi-final of the 1970 World Cup, Italy against West Germany, which finished 4-3. That's certainly going to feel very different. Um, but yeah, I mean, there's been, and there's also depends what you want from a game, right? Do you want drama? Do you want high stakes? Do you want incidents? Do you just want really talented players? I mean, there have been a lot.
What's the game that has been like most edge of your seat, like the at watching?
Well, for me personally, because I
Yeah,
was
yeah,
completely invested in it,
yeah.
obviously being Italian, the semifinal of the 2006 World Cup, Italy against Germany in Dortmund. Borussia Dortmund Stadium is one of the largest in the world, probably the loudest. It's certainly, in my memory, it's the loudest place I've ever been. Obviously surrounded by a German home crowd. Germany, hosts of the tournament, fairly confident they were going to win. Um, and then Italy score twice late on to beat them 2-0. That, for me, in terms of tension, drama, and again, you live it differently if you're there in person. That was just one of the most unbelievable sporting moments that I kind of personally witnessed. Another one that I personally witnessed and that I'll never forget is the 2005 Champions League final in Istanbul, AC Milan against Liverpool, where Liverpool eventually won on penalties. They were losing 3-0 at halftime. But to say they were losing, I mean, Milan were absolutely wiping the floor with them. They'd finished close to mid-table, I think a seventh or maybe fifth or so, whatever. They didn't have a great league season. It's kind of a collection of waifs and strays with a couple outstanding players like Steven Gerrard, Jamie Carragher. Um, and whereas Milan were, they'd won it 2 years earlier. And then somehow in the space of 8 minutes, they scored three times. Milan then had another zillion chances, couldn't score, and then it goes to penalties, and Liverpool made their penalties, and Milan didn't, and Liverpool won. And I think that is probably one of the certainly one of the greatest comebacks I've ever seen.
Why do European football managers look like watch models compared to America? I mean, I just imagine, no offense to Andy Reid, but I just compare Andy Reid to like Pep Guardiola. Pep Guardiola looks like he could be like doing a Dior ad, you know? Like, why is that the case?
I don't know. I never really noticed that aspect of it. I think, yeah, most probably look better than Bill Belichick, but it's not a very high bar, or indeed Andy. Um, but it's interesting because it's definitely a thing. I feel like a lot of these guys kind of read the same self-help books, and there's an element of vanity to them. If you remember Jurgen Klopp, the Liverpool manager, who, now he was not a snappy dresser, and he did not, he's not. I I don't know if you'll get to listen to this. I'm sure he won't be offended. He's not a classically handsome man, but he still has these little things of vanity. Like he had an eye operation to lose his glasses. He had his teeth redone. So there's an element of that. Some people have posited that, if you look scruffy, you have to kind of look the part if you want to command respect. They've suggested that as a coach, although I think this is true in any sport, you're always selling yourself, right? You're selling yourself to the players because you want them to buy into what you're telling them. You're selling yourself to the owners because you want to stay in a job. You're selling yourself to the fans because you don't want them to boo you or boo your team. Maybe there's an element of that. I should say that for me, one of the greatest managers in the world right now, the current coach of Brazil, former Real Madrid coach, and many other teams, Carlo Ancelotti, also probably not a classically handsome man, and often does look rather disheveled, even when he was younger. So I don't know that it always holds true, but yes, the ones who look good tend to look very good.
The If I had to be stuck on a train with any, I love Marino. He's a fascinating talker. If you had to be stuck with one of these coaches, would it be Marino?
It's a good question. I mean, I've had the privilege of spending time with most of them at one point or another. And it's really interesting because some of them are so sure of themselves, some of them are so insecure, some of them have a really wide-ranging culture, and interest beyond sports. Um, some of them are completely monothematic, and literally know nothing about anything. I mean, I don't just mean that they need to know about politics
Yeah.
or economics, but I guarantee you there are Champions League winning coaches who couldn't tell you who Taylor Swift is. No, no, I'm not kidding, because they are so focused, so 24/7 on what they do. Um, because it does absorb you. Remember, again, not that we have to keep comparing to American sports, but you know, this is a this is basically a 10-month grind for these guys, right? And if you're at a top team, you're playing twice a week and you're traveling, you're getting on a plane every couple days. And the game, and this isn't like the NBA where nothing matters until you reach the playoffs, right? It actually does matter. Um, and the squads are larger. The level of pressure that they're under and the focus, and you know, people deal with the pressure and the stress in different ways, is really constant and continuous.
I was with somebody and we were listening to Gab and Jules podcast, and you said you had this line. It was such a clever crafting of words. You said, I'm going to butcher this, but it was about goal differential, I think. And you said, I don't believe in goal differential, but I believe in God. And what did you say exactly? It was so clever.
Oh, I think goal difference, or goal differential, as people call it in the States, is a total fugazi, meaningless. It's not a measure of anything, right? Because you have score effects, you've got situations in the game, and it just really bugs me that in some countries, in some leagues, they award titles based on that. Because yes, it's really relevant, the fact that at 4-0 up, the Burnley goalkeeper dropped the ball and it went into the net. And so I've got one more goal than you do. And so if we finish level on points, this is not the way the game is played. It should be work. That's why I long maintain that teams finish level on points. You should have a one-game playoff to determine the winner in a neutral venue. The object of the game isn't to score goals while not conceding goals, which is what goal difference is all about. The object of the game is to win matches.
But what was the rhetorical flip you did to Jules? It was like, I don't believe in this, but I believe in God, and then you had this other thing. It was so good. It was.
I honestly don't.
It was amazing. I'll put a clip.
I don't remember.
Only
and the goal difference is obviously much less.
Yeah, as you know, I don't believe in goal difference.
No,
I refuse to believe in it.
You do.
I believe in God, and I think God will change the Premier League should it ever come up.
Now God hasn't changed it, so
but He hasn't had to.
Counts.
He hasn't had to, right?
It's a plus 15 swing. It's a lot.
I do 2 shows a week with Jules, plus what we do on the FC show. So.
It's amazing. But anyways, what I was trying to say is, you're clearly like, I've always thought, wow, this is a really smart guy. Like, this is a guy who's like, I'm sure like knows about what's going on in every sector of the news. Let me just try give you a general thing, because I'm just so curious about what you think about other topics. I'll try and make this broad. You got this very European, Italy, you're in the UK. How do you feel about what's going on in Europe right now? I mean, obviously there's some scary things. They're talking about a far-right party coming in power in Germany. I know it's a broad question. Do you have any thoughts, or is that too broad?
It's a broad issue, and I think you have to look. I come from a country in Italy where we have a far-right politician in power. And the funny thing about her being a far-right politician in Giorgia Meloni, and again, if you don't know what I'm talking about, you might have seen her. She's blonde and she's short, and she actually speaks very good English for an Italian politician. I kind of feel that she hasn't been able to really, she's actually governed in a very kind of right of center way. And she's kind of taken the more sort of far right elements, most of whom are people would say are far right elements, but they weren't further right than she was before she became prime minister. She's kind of sidelined them a little bit. Like, she made one, like, I think he's like the Speaker of the House of Deputies or something, Fontana, which, prestigious job, but you don't actually get to decide anything ever, other than parliamentary procedure. And so she's actually governed in a very sort of traditional center-right way, despite the fact that she has the votes and the coalition. And I think a lot of that, and I don't want to appear as like Mr. Centrist, because again, I'm not going to talk about politics, but so I'm kind of stating to you how I see the situation as a whole, right? Mm-hmm. That in Europe so far, anyway, the institutions have been strong enough that they've been able to mitigate the extremes. Whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, you may disagree with, because you may be very progressive or you may be very right-wing or authoritarian. And I think part of that is also that when we speak of right or left, conceptually, I mean, you can do it from an economic perspective, right? Where, I'm right wing because I believe in free markets and a tiny state, and Milton Friedman was right and all this stuff. Or you can say, no, I'm left wing because I want a welfare state and healthcare and jobs for everyone and blah blah blah. That's one lens. I feel like in Europe and many countries we have those sort of titles. We're socialist, we're whatever, we're Christian conservatives. But in practice, and maybe it's the Judeo-Christian tradition or whatever, if you go to the right and you find a lot of committed Christians and you find a lot of people who actually like the government taking care of them, and you go to the left and you kind of have the same thing, even though maybe they didn't like, there's much more commonalities, right? And that's why some people talk about populism versus elitism as another lens to look at that. I think it's just very entrenched in Europe because it's been around. Europe as a country's been around for a long time. Sorry, Europe as an entity of with sort of governments and so on has been around for a while. And I think the institutions so far, even when they come under attack, have held up pretty well. And also Italy is slightly maybe a special case because, I think between 1945 and 1991, the second biggest political party in Italy was the Communist Party. And for 101 reasons, there were many people who said, like, these guys can never come to power, during the Cold War. I mean, later the communists moved away from the Soviet Union and whatever, and kind of became their own thing. But it created a situation where if you're governing, you kind of couldn't ignore that other 40% who didn't vote for you. And the institutions that were there, and maybe it's a weakness, they have entrenched institutions and so, and they're kind of like, wait, we want to make sure that the 40% who did not vote for the winner are treated well, because next time there's an election, those guys could be in charge. So yeah, I don't know if this answers your question, but I feel a little bit like Emmanuel Macron, if you saw his speech in Davos, where he wore the sunglasses and stuff. I think he kind of touched upon that a little bit when he talked about, regulation and doing things more slowly, and having a certain solidity and stability. I think a lot of people actually identify with that, which is why some people may say kind of more extreme things to get elected, both on the left and on the right. But when they come into power, they tend to gravitate kind of towards a much narrower sort of center-right, center-left spectrum.
Is Europe ever going to forgive America for, I know we don't want to get political, but, obviously when our president, referred to Mark Carney as Governor Carney, that's a, sign of disrespect. Is the view of America really changed a lot over the, or is it irrecoverable?
I think, no, I don't think the view of America as a country, as a culture. I mean, those of us in Western Europe, we're all steeped in American culture, right? And I mean, we listen to the same music, we watch the same movies, we all eat burgers and stuff like that. And we're exposed to a ton of Americans because there's a ton of Americans living in Europe, whether those in the military, for people here for business reasons, students, and whatever, tourists. We see Americans. No, I'm a special case, obviously, but these other people, they see Americans all the time. And that because you get to see them, you don't view them as a monolith. And so you may agree or disagree with the government that's currently in charge, but you tend to view the whole as a group of individuals. And I think that's one of the great strengths of being a big country that has sent people all over the world. People don't view the US as one block. I don't know about you, but I don't know any North Koreans. Zero, right? I know people of North Korean descent, but not any, So if the North Korean leader does something and you tell me all North Koreans are like this, I might believe you. I've never met them. How do I know, right? To a lesser degree, I live in London. When I was growing up, obviously it was a Cold War. You didn't meet any Russians. You just didn't. Very, very few. Today, London, well, a bit less after the invasion of Ukraine, but a lot of Russians in London. And while there may be an authoritarian leader in Russia right now, you realize that there's a wide range of people. And, governments don't reflect the whole country. I mean, maybe they should in some way, but they reflect the people who elected them. I think more accurately, it's not that it's a negative view, it's a fearful view. It's a fearful view that people are scared that whether it's international law or a breakdown or the unpredictability or the markets or whatever, I think that's something you hear a lot. Some people espouse a fear that kind of model of governing could be emulated in European countries. Some people say that it's already there in some countries, like Hungary, for example. I'm not so sure about that. I think, certainly the European Union is so integrated that it would be really hard for somebody to kind of copy that model. So, and I think the other thing too is being, I think the only time that I think people have a high tolerance and a high respect for the relationship between Europe and the US. And maybe the only time the line was really crossed was the remark about NATO. Well, Greenland and the remark about NATO, Yeah. And you put it in context and, more Danish soldiers were killed as a percentage of population than any other country, including the US, after 9/11. The only time that the NATO article was invoked after the US was attacked. So I think a lot of people were just horrified by that. But, he clarified his comments. And I think a lot of people also drew strength from the fact that a number of people who are involved with government in the US also spoke out and said, well, hang on a minute, this is what we mean. So, no, I don't, not everybody likes the current US president. Yeah. Rarely do people in Europe like the current US president. That's fine. It's not their president. There is some level of fear because y'all have nukes. But in terms of the country itself and the people in it, we have such an exposure to it that I don't see this sense of negativity or whatever towards the actual people. Even people who might have supported this president or might continue to support him. Like, I think people still treat others as individuals.
Yeah.
Right?
I mean,
who you voted for does not define you 100% as a person. It's kind of the TLDR.
Yeah. Well, you're being very generous because if I was a European, I would be very offended by the J.D. Vance coming over to Germany and then lecturing me about how we have to allow Nazis to march down the street and like he's an anti-interventionist except when it comes to promoting far-right parties in Germany. So.
I mean, like, he's a vice president, right?
Yeah.
So he's got a boss. Right. So, and he has a boss who maybe often changes his mind. And so I kind of feel that guy's kind of sort of guessing what the president, all right, what's the party line, right? So, I mean, I want to be a team player. What do you expect me to come out here and say, And sometimes he says things and then the president contradicts him. It's.
No, he scares me a lot more than Trump. He scares me a lot more than Trump. But you've been so generous. Thank you so much.
No problem.
You're so smart. You do such a great job.
No, thank you. It's been I enjoyed our conversation.